This is George Moore. I'm going to try to do some projects on tape that will help my children and grandchildren to understand some of the things that happened in our childhood and while we were growing up. Two weeks ago, we buried McGee Moore, who was my older brother. That left me the survivor out of a family of 8 children. We had often talked about it with myself and some of the other children about doing a record of our family activities so that it would be revealing to people that might follow us. McGee took a lot of movie pictures of our family. He had one of the earliest 8mm cameras that they came out with. He recorded several family reunions, and those are priceless. We have converted those to a 16mm tape, and each one of the family has a copy of that. At one of our last meetings, my brother and I were talking out loud, as we're wont to do, in the family gathering, and he said, "George, do you remember when you won first prize at Cisco in swimming?" Well, we always give each other a good lead so they can expound on it if they feel like it. We didn't win first place in swimming, but 2 more boys and I were in Cisco. They were on their way home to Stanford, and their uncle was our neighbor, and he took the 2 boys and I to Cisco. What we could do a whole lot of was do all kinds of stunts from a swing, because we had a tree over our swimming hole and we had a cable touched to it, and we could go out and turn flips and do a lot of things on a swing. We didn't have a diving board there, so we couldn't do any fancy diving. Well, at Cisco Lake, it was fairly new at that time, and they had installed a swing, but nobody used it. Well, the 2 Rolling boys and I decided to give them an exhibition on the swing, and we proceeded to do it. Everybody enjoyed watching us and marveling that we could do so many things. And when we started to leave, one of the officials there in Cisco came up and gave us a ribbon each. One was blue and the other one was green and the other one was white. Now then, I don't know which one of us was first, and it didn't really matter. We weren't contesting, we were just having a good time. But we were talking about that, and Wendell, who is my son, says, "Dad, I didn't know anything about that." Well, I got to thinking there's just a lot of things that Wendell and George don't know, and it's not anything we were trying to conceal from them, but we just never thought it was important to tell them a lot of things that we went through. Now, I say went through advisedly, because in my time I was born in 1917, and in 1921 I remember back to, and some of the things that we did from that all the way through up to age 40 was would be revealing, and so I'm trying to accomplish some things that they might remember. I'm going to do this by relating events rather than trying to make this a historical. I will try to follow an order, in some sort of order, but some incidents that we had and we did and enjoyed back in the 1920s and 30s. The first thing that I'm going to talk about is the Gustine Fishing Club. Now, Gustine is a small town, and it didn't have a Chamber of Commerce or any of the other civic grouping, but it did have a fishing club. And one of the things they did was elect me president when I was 5 years old. Well, I took the position kind of seriously. And when they elected me president, they decided that once a month I'd give a talk. And in the meeting before, we'd decide what I was going to talk on. And so they would assign me things to make a speech on, and it might be how to catch catfish, or it might be honorable actions, or it could be a lot of things. And so once a month I gave them a talk. The purpose of the club, as its name implies, was that once a year we went fishing. Now this is quite an event because we didn't have any good fishing water close to us, and we went to the Llano River and the Sincebo River, and that was about 50 to 100 miles from where we lived. And once a year the fishing club, all the members of it that could, and there was 10 or 12 business owners that were the members of the fishing club, we'd all take off in the spring and go for a week and camp out and do some fishing. Well, one of the duties that they gave me as president was to collect dues. And we charged a dime a month per member to be paid into the club to take care of any expenses or help on the fishing trip. Well, most of my time was spent trying to collect that dime from the members because they were all hard to collect from. They'd say they didn't have the money, or they'd give me $1, and if I didn't have change, why, they'd take the $1 back. They just gave me all kinds of problems. And so the collecting dues was a continuous effort on my part. Looking back on it, I know they enjoyed it, and I know that I didn't, because I thought I was supposed to get the money, and they were very reluctant to let me collect it. One instance was Jake Harbin was running a cafe then and was a member of the club. And he hadn't paid his dues in 2 months, and I couldn't get him to pay them. And so I went in his cafe, and not trying to hide or anything, but I picked up 3 bottles of ketchup and told him that that would take care of his dues, and we'd take the ketchup on the fishing trip. Well, he said, "You got to call a meeting because this is not right." And so we called a meeting and got the members that were available there, and they decided, after a lot of argument and everything, that 1 whole bottle of ketchup was better than 3 that were about half full that they would spoil. So Jay went back to his cafe and got 1 bottle of ketchup and brought it up. Now he says, "Does that make me a full member again?" And we said, yes, it did. And so he said, well, I'm going to invite y'all to your next meeting at my cafe, and I'm going to charge you $1 each one for your meal. Well, that was high at the time because we could get almost anything for 50 cents. You'd get a T-bone steak for 50 cents. So we said, well, if you invite us, we might not come. Well, we had a big quarrel on that. So they were having a lot of fun on how I handled the problems. One day, I was fooling around the house, and Dad, who ran a hardware store in Gustine, called Mom and told her to wash behind my ears because the fishing club was going to have an emergency meeting. And he'd come by and pick me up. So he came up a little while and picked me up. We went down to the meeting, which was at the Hickenbottom store. And I've been thinking about it, and it was my duty to call special meetings. And nobody else had the authority to call them unless I was out of pocket. And I didn't figure that I was out of pocket. So Dad and I got to the meeting, and they were all sitting around looking at the floor with their chins in their hands and real sad. So I decided I wouldn't say anything about why they were calling the meeting. And so I asked who called the meeting, and Jay Duval, who was one of the charter members, says, well, George says, we've got an emergency, and says we just didn't know what to do about it. And Tom Patton's wife had just told him that he can't go on the fishing trip. Well, Tom was one of the main members of the club and enjoyed fishing as much as anybody, and he had a good time, and he always looked after me to see that I got a good seat or a good place to fish and got a good worm and everything like that. Kind of took care of me. Well, this was a disaster because I couldn't figure on going on a fishing trip without Tom along. So we talked about it, and they finally guided me into a decision that the next day I'd go home for lunch with Tom and try to talk his wife into letting him go on a fishing trip. Well, that gave me an afternoon and night to think about how I was going to talk Mrs. Patton into let Tom go fishing. And so I went to thinking about the last trip and how something that Tom had done for me that meant a whole lot to me, and so I decided to build my presentation on that. I didn't like fish. I just didn't like it at all. And in order to eat it, I drowned it in ketchup. And fish is about what we had at 2 meals while we were camping out. And of course, we'd have eggs and bacon and stuff like that for breakfast. But we ran out of ketchup, and I couldn't eat fish. So Tom got in the car, and he drove about 5-6 miles over to the store and bought a bottle of ketchup and brought it back in so that I could have something, eat the fish. And so I decided I'd build my presentation on that. And so when we got in there, and I told Mrs. Patton that I had some things that I would like to relate to her, and I'd like for her to give serious thought to it. And she says, well, I sure will. So I said, if Tom doesn't go on the trip, I don't think that I can go. I said, he takes care of me, and he does things that makes me enjoy the trip, but without him, I don't think I would. Now then, I told her about him going and getting the ketchup for me, and he always pulled the covers over me at night, and if I got frightened sometimes at night, I did, well, he'd come over and soothe me, and I told her, I said, I just don't think that I can do that. Now then, would you tell me the reason that he can't go? And she says, well, George says he hasn't hoed the garden, he hasn't watered the garden. He hasn't mowed the grass. He hadn't done any of those things. Said all he does is fool around with his fishing equipment. And so I just decided that he couldn't go. So I said, well, I will tell you what I will do. I'll come down, and he has to be at work every day, and I'll come down here and I'll hoe your garden, and I'll water the garden, and I'll mow the yard, if you'll let him go. Well, she said she'd think about it. And so the next day I went by the store of their Hickenbottoms and asked Tom what she said. He said, well, George says, we decided that I hadn't been doing anything, and if I would just get on the ball and go ahead and do some things around the house there, that she'd let me go. And said, that's what we're going to do. Says, I'm going to do the hoeing and the watering, and she's going to let me go. And I said, well, that sure does make me feel better. And he said, well, I'm glad that you helped me. Says, I don't think we'd ever solve that unless you'd come on. Of course, this was a bunch of baloney, but I ate it up. I liked being a leader, and I felt kind of proud of myself. Now, the 3 years that I was active in the club on 3 fishing trips that we made, I always caught the biggest fish. Now, looking back on it, I can tell you the reason why is because, like the last trip that we went on, Jay said, George says, I left my tobacco back there on my cot. And he was a heavy man, and he said, I'd hate to walk back there and get it. And I said, well, I'll go get it. And so I stuck my pole in a hole in the bank, went over to the camp, which was, maybe half a mile from there, and got his tobacco. Sure enough, it was on the cot. And I was coming back, I got halfway there, and they were yelling, George, come on, you got a fish on your line. So I ran up there, and that pole was almost bent in double. And so I got on the pole and finally landed the fish, and that was the biggest fish that we got on that trip. Well, I got to thinking about other times when I caught the big fish. And I had never been tending the pole when I caught them. I got the pole and pulled them in, but I never tended. So, of course, what they'd do is they'd catch a big one, they'd put it on my hook, send me somewhere and put it on my hook and call me back, and I did. But I didn't question at all that I was the best fisherman there and could catch the biggest fish. I thought it was my due as president to lead the men and to catch the biggest fish, and that's what we did. There was lots of instances in that where the men probably had a good time. There was lots of instances in that when I questioned how we were running things and my duties and things of that nature. And one day I made a speech on line and said that line in most, I was saying that it was the best thing to do in most circumstances. But if you were telling a kind lie, that was permissible. Or if you were telling a lie that just to help somebody else feel better, that was permissible. But when you told a lie that gave you an advantage in a business situation or any other situation, and if you lied to gain advantage, what you were sinning and would need to get forgiveness because what you were doing was wrong. Well, after I made my talk on that, the whole town started calling me the boy that couldn't tell a lie. And they were just doing that because I had made a talk on lying and how it could get you in trouble. But that stayed with me the rest of my life, as I was a boy that couldn't tell a lie. And during my life, I've never lied to gain advantage. Now, I've lied in other circumstances. In fact, I'm one of the best liars in the family. And we had some big liars, and we had contests who was the biggest liar. But that followed me all the way through my life. And there's two times in my business life that this came up. One, I was helping train an agent in Dallas, and we called on the Hickbottom store hardware there in Dallas. And I walked in there to meet the prospect with the agent, and he said, "Oh, you're George Moore." I said, "I know you. You're the guy that can't tell a lie." And the guy I was training just looked with his mouth open, because this guy was the head of the Hickenbottom for that area there, and was later on the board of directors of the insurance company in which I worked. That came from the talk of the town that I couldn't tell a lie. Another time, I had told an agent in Arizona that our product was not competitive in the instance that he was wanting it to use. And the company was having a leader, I believe we call it a round up for leaders or something similar like that, but we'd take the leading producers of the company and listen to what they would say, and would make them feel good. But Vance told them that I told him that our products were not competitive. Now, this made Cullum, who was the president of the company, an excellent fellow, and I liked him very much. But he made a remark or two about me saying that our products were not competitive. He asked Charlie Alexander to get me and talk to me about being loyal to the company. Well, Charlie says, "I'll do that," but he says, "I'll be wasting my time, because George can't lie." And somebody asked him if a product was competitive, and he said that it was not competitive. Well, that was just what he was compelled to say. Well, Cullum got over that and was talking to me about it. And I told him the circumstances that made me say it wasn't competitive, and it was all just for one prospect of a certain age, and he already had a proposal that Vance was wanting to beat. And I said we couldn't beat it. But I asked Charlie, I said, "Charlie, what do you mean saying that I wouldn't lie about it?" And he said, "Well, George, everybody knows you won't lie." And I had never thought that in my business life, that thing that started in a big old speech of mine about the setting and lying for an advantage had gone through my whole business career with me. Well, there's one more thing on the fishing club that I will relate, because it gives you an idea of how people did and what they did and how they did it. But we moved from from Gustine to Carlton, and we moved in January. And in March, Dad got word that they were wanting to have a fishing club meeting and wanted me to come over there. So Dad and I got in a wagon, hitched up to a pair of Spanish mules, and rode the 15 miles in real cold weather to go to Gustine to attend a fishing club meeting. Well, it turned out that they had decided that they was going to let the fishing club go. Me and I had moved off, and they just needed to settle up all the affairs and everything, and so they had figured out that they had $3 and something, I've forgotten what, in the treasury. And they said that my duties had been very flexing, and I had worked on them real well, and so they were going to let me have the $3. And so when I was going home in the wagon, and I was telling Dad, he didn't go to the meeting, He says, what are you going to do with the $3? And I told him, well, I'm going to buy a Zane Grey book, The Wildfire. I can get it from Sears and Roebuck in the catalog. And he said, well, that would be a good thing to buy because the whole family would enjoy it. And I said, yeah. And he said, did you know that y'all had $3 and something? And I said, well, Dad, I don't remember us having anything left. He said, well, I don't either. He said, I think they just made that up so they could call a meeting and give you a send-off. And I said, well, I guess they did. And I wrote each one of them a letter. Everything was wrong with it because you just have to remember I was just starting the second grade. But the fish club in Gustine and all those guys that were members on it were always a good friend to me all through my growing up years when I had the time to be around one of them. Well, I always enjoyed it. The importance of the fishing club was that there was a town that didn't have a way to actually take on civic responsibilities. They didn't have the committees or anything. And so they thought it'd be a good time to do that. It turned out that I was their main project instead of doing things for the city while they were making up things for me to do. So in that time, there was, if you remember, there was, as I remember it, there was no radios. Of course, there was no TV. There was a telephone. And we did have a Victrola that you wound up. And we did have a car. A car wasn't as useful as it is today because the roads wouldn't accommodate it. You'd get out of town, you'd get stuck. So there was a lot of ways to entertain yourself, and they entertained themselves by helping each other and having fun with me.